Everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. First and foremost, yes, I am back. I do apologize for the lack of content over the last couple of weeks. Have been dealing with some stuff and considering a few things, but I am back. We will be trying to resume the content train starting with this week's video. Now, obviously, I did miss the Kayle release week, but I am here finally today to talk about the Kayle rework and what I generally think about it. Now, yes, Morgana was reworked at the same exact time, but given that she's almost identical to how she was before, I don't see much of a point of making a video that essentially boils down to it's just Morgana, but a little bit better looking. So I will be ignoring that and focusing mostly on Kayle, as she received quite a few more changes and she's much different than she used to be. Now, I think the biggest thing to comment on with the Kayle rework is Riot did a very good job of just sharpening her edges, both her good and bad ones. So yeah, Kayle's early game was pretty much always bad, but it now is actually atrocious. She is probably the worst champion in the game pre-level 6. I say that without even a hint of sarcasm. She's probably the worst champion pre-6 in the entire game. That being said, though, her sort of late game hyperscaling carry fantasy has been dramatically improved. She is so very strong in the late game, able to sort of melt entire teams if she's given the opportunity to just DPS, and I really do like that about her, and she's so much better at it than she was previously, because before she had to worry about the E cooldown, keep mashing that. Just in general, there were some issues with Kayle's previous kit, but now I really do feel like she's significantly better in the late game than she used to be, and she even more so embodies the sort of late game hyperscaling fantasy, so I do really appreciate that about the Kayle rework, like I said, and I do think that's a good thing for Riot to do, because before she was supposed to always be weak early, strong late, but she wasn't necessarily that weak early because she had the sort of range to just CS from a distance, to harass, to do a bunch of really silly things, had the ultimate for sort of a guaranteed 2 seconds of damage per time. So she wasn't necessarily the weakest thing in the early game, but her late game also wasn't tremendously overpowered because she had to be kept in check because of the sort of nature of being a mixed damage, late game scaling hyper carry. There were a bunch of things that Riot did in order to make it so that she wouldn't just run away with the game. So I do really like that the new kit sort of sharpened both of those edges and that she really more so embodies that sort of late game scaling fantasy that people are looking for. Now, her kit, honestly, has stayed mostly the same. The Q is still just sort of a generic blast that slows people. It still has the heal, which is mostly just used for the movement speed bonus, which it always was. A lot of people are saying, well, the heal is bad, but the heal has always been bad. It was just mostly used for the movement speed bonus instead, so I don't think that's changed very much. Obviously, her E only gives her one bonus auto attack from a range, but the fact that it hits AoE, I think is pretty nice. It does allow you to kind of get the auto attack reset in there, and once you hit level 11, you're full ranged anyways, so I do think that that was a good change to it in order to give it some kind of degree of use in the early game, but also make it so that it's still useful later in the game as sort of the AA reset and giving you a little bit more damage over time. So I do quite like that change. Now, the ultimate I know is a very controversial change. A lot of people really dislike the fact that you can't do anything while you're casting your ultimate, so it really hurts your ability to survive in late game team fights, but I think that this is a healthier version of the ability and slightly more easily balanced version of the ability, because if you think about it, how it acted before, Kayle was guaranteed 3 seconds of damage over time in the middle of late game team fights because she just cast it on herself and keep right clicking people, and that was crazy because it meant that there's not a lot you can do about Kayle when she's late game. You can't kill her, you can't burst her down, she's just gonna pop the ultimate and then continue to just hit everyone and kill them instantly. And I do feel like with all the changes they made to Kayle's late game now, that if you were to give her 3 seconds of guaranteed DPS, that she would just be completely overpowered. She would annihilate entire enemy team compositions with no problems if she got even at least 3 seconds of DPS. So a free DPS, I should say. So I do actually like that change. I think this is a more balanceable version of the ultimate, and you still never really cast it for the damage. You cast it to mitigate burst damage, which is important on Kayle because sometimes it's like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to DPS over these 3 seconds while my ultimate is channeling, but at the same time, maybe I don't want to because I'm getting CC'd, the enemy are jumping on me, blowing all their damage. In this situation, I'm pretty much going to be running for my life or stunned until death anyways, so I don't mind about losing some damage in order to not take the damage that's coming back at me. So I do really appreciate that. I think that's a good change, and it does give Kayle more incentive to cast it on other champions than herself, because you do have the ability to say, no wait, hold on, I need to keep this guy alive because he's important, so I'm going to cast it on them. He's going to be able to keep doing damage. Sure, I'm not doing anything right now, but he needs to survive. That's the most important thing. So I do actually quite like the ultimate change. Now, I think the biggest thing for Kayle is that she isn't as much of a solo champion as she used to be. Back in the day, it really did feel like Kayle could range off on her own, just sort of do her own thing, and she was very self-sufficient because she did have the heal, she had the ability to press R and get that guaranteed damage through like I was talking about before, and that made her quite difficult to deal with, and it did make her a very good solo champion. I don't feel like Kayle is there anymore. I really do feel like new Kayle, even if you can hit level 16, you need to have your team working with you. You need to have a front line to fight behind. There are a bunch of disadvantages to new Kayle. You can't just sort of walk at the enemy team and expect to be able to just kill them all because you can always intervention yourself. That's not the case anymore. So I do feel like Kayle needs to have some kind of front line. She needs to have someone playing in front of her, starting the team fight, peeling for her, setting her up, so that she can actually go in and do the sort of godlike damage that she is starting to become known for. So I do quite like that. That change, but it does mean that there's going to have to be a bit of a stylistic change because you are going to be a lot more vulnerable at almost all stages of the game than you're used to because of the changes they made. Now, I think that the biggest thing is because her early game is so bad, it seems like there is a limit to how many positions she can actually play. I know previous Kayle was sort of known for being able to play almost any position. I don't feel like that's the case anymore with new Kayle. First and foremost, her early game is so awful. She's definitely no longer a support. And I don't feel like she can survive bot lane very well just because two ranged champions, or even a ranged champion and somebody beefy up in the front line, will just kind of annihilate Kayle. I don't think there's anything she can do about that other than just trying to last it from a distance. That's pretty much all of her lanes, but I think bot lane in particular, she's just still at a huge disadvantage due to being fully melee and not really having any way to get onto ranged targets until she at least hits level 6 and has a bit more ways to get in. So I do think that bot lane is probably out. I think mid lane as well is a bit of a weaker position to be playing Kayle in. I don't think she's that strong because, again, the range on mages and their wave clear is just going to shut her out from being able to do much of anything, really. I think Kayle, again, just wants to farm, but mid laners are so much more easily able to harass you and keep you away from minions that it becomes an even harder lane for Kayle to deal with. The other thing is, Kayle always draws ganks, because everyone knows the counterplay to Kayle is exploit her when she doesn't even qualify as a champion. So, and mid lane's a lot easier to gank. So again, I think that that's not necessarily the best place to play her. Top lane, in all honesty, is probably where I see Kayle getting played the most. She's usually going to be into another melee champion who, sure, they can still bully you around like someone like Renekton, but you do have the ability to kind of walk away and at least deal with a melee champion who's going to have a harder time getting on top of you. If you're into a tank, you don't have to worry about getting solo killed by a tank that much, so you can just kind of keep last hitting. You have to play a little bit safe in case a gank comes through, but you do have the ability to just kind of CS for almost free because a tank's not going to be able to do that much to you in the early game either. And so I think that's probably where she's going to end up being played most often. I think jungle Kayle is really bad. She can farm, but she has nothing to offer the team at all. So even something pretty bad like Twitch jungle that wants to spend most of its time farming, at least Twitch jungle has a pretty scary early game because of the ability to gank from ambush, whereas Kayle doesn't have that. Kayle just kind of walks at you and hopefully lands her Q, and that's almost never going to happen. So I do think Kayle top is probably going to be the place where we see her played most often. I think that's going to be the best place for her to be played. But that's just my opinion. We'll have to see once the pros finally get their hands on her. But I do, again, see this champion being mostly a top lane pick, but definitely always going to be stalling for the late game, just trying to survive, get CS, hit that level 11 mark, and once you're there, then Kayle really feels like she can actually start doing something. So I do quite appreciate that. But in general, I'm pretty happy with the rework. Kit-wise, at least, I really dislike her default appearance. I have not even used it in game. Fortunately, I have a bunch of Kayle skins, so I haven't had to worry about that, but her default appearance is actual garbage. But the kit, I'm really happy with. I think it maintains a lot of what Kayle mains really appreciated before. I think it really does play out Kayle's edges, like I said before, and I think it does help fit Kayle into the modern age of League of Legends design. So I think it's quite nice in whole. But go ahead and let me know what you guys are thinking of the Kayle rework down in the comment section below. Would love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. And if you're looking for more Grab the Lantern content, you can check out my blog, which is linked down in the description below. I upload an article just about each and every single day for your enjoyment. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I will talk to you all later.